competition, just to get you off to a good start.
It's nothing like having friends like Dave, is there? Yeah. Well, again, just as Jason was saying, it's a pleasure to be here, to be a part of this this day, and want to talk a little bit more about, kind of pick up where Jason left off, about regenerative ranching. One of the things that we did when we made the commitment at Noble Research Institute is that we wanted to track everything. And oftentimes the thing that we forget that the last thing that most of us want to worry about are the economics. And that's one of the questions we get a lot of when people ask, well, is this cost effective? Or comments that I don't think I can put all that infrastructure in. It gets back down to, do you really understand what the economics are? And we're trying to track the data, not only the data that's going into the research programs for the soil ecology, animal performance, but also on the economics too. So we're going to give you just a little bit of picture. And the best way to do it is just to show you what we're doing. And I think I want to qualify it by saying, this is just our information. It's just Noble's. And in order to do that, I need to probably give you just a little bit of context so you understand from which this information is coming. So we'll go ahead and get started. And what I like to say is that, our North Star is our founder, Lloyd Noble. He had a passion for the soil. He understood that the soil was the basis of where our culture exists. To have a strong economy, you've got to have a strong agricultural system. And then if you're going to have a strong agricultural system, you have to have strong soils. And that was where he wanted to put our efforts. And as we have moved forward over the last few years, we feel like we have a better understanding not only of what we need to do, but how we need to manage our soils in order to rebuild some of these soils that have been degraded over time. Next. So just to look at the Noble ranches, we'll go ahead. This is where we're located, right down here in the southern part of Oklahoma. Next. As we begin to move in a little bit. You can see this is where our town Ardmore is, and we've got all these little properties, some of them not so little, all around that area of Ardmore. Next. And I'm going to quickly tell you that we've got all these properties are managed in 6 units, of which constitute a little over 13,000 acres. This right here is the headquarters. And the primary thing we need to know at this point in time is predominantly introduced pasture. And you can see that this little area is offset right here, and there's housing additions all around us. Next. Then we've got another one we call Pasture Demonstration Farm. It's out west of town. What it is you've got quite a bit of introduced pasture, a little bit of grazed cropland, and again, there's housing additions all around it. Next. Then we've got these properties down along the Red River. This here's the Red River Ranch. We've got a lot of introduced pasture, a little bit of cropland, and we're right adjacent to the Red River. Next. This right here is the Coffee Ranch. The Coffee Ranch is all native pasture except a little bit of introduced right here on the front. Next. And then we've got the Oswald Ranch. This is 5,000 acres, pretty rough country. You can see that it's also native pasture. And the key thing to look at these, what I want you to do is when you take home at these different pastures or these different ranches, is that certainly we probably have a property that represents something that a producer across the state or northern Texas might have. Look at the next one. We even got these couple of little small ones that I actually have a few countries on one of them too. Introduced pasture or go back type land, something that people can relate to, but we're trying to monitor and manage all of these under a regenerative manner. Go ahead. So what does this really look like on the transition? Because we, like most people, if you'd have come to our place, Jason did, he came down here and saw us back in 2021, not wasn't 1921, but 2021. And when we were looking at the property, it was managed using the best management practices that we knew across that whole operation. We were rotationally grazing. We were using fertilizer on the introduced pastures. We were spraying weeds. We were doing exactly what we had all learned we were supposed to do on each of those type of systems. So when we made the transition, we wanted to make sure that it stuck, and we wanted to see what kind of improvements it made. And it was quite a change. So let's go ahead. A lot of this when we start thinking about it is it was something going to be completely new. Well, historically, we actually had a property where we had managed under holistic resource management for 10 years. It was at Coffee Ranch, where if we went back and all we did was just put in some grazing management, allowed rest and recovery, no inputs that went into it, and you can see we went from 8 pastures in 1988 to 1997, we had 42 paddocks, and during that period of time, we went from 1,000, or about 10,000 animal unit days to about 40,000 animal unit days. That's 350% increase, and we didn't do anything but graze differently. So we had a little bit of experience, but we really hadn't adopted to the extent to understand what we were really doing. And that was dated way back when we quit this was probably in about 2000, but that land had stayed in a condition where we could continue with it later on. Let's go ahead. So as we look at it, we decided that we needed a focus. And so our focus today is land stewardship for improved soil health and grazing animal production with lasting producer profitability. So it's not only improving the land, but if we can improve profitability or lasting profitability, why are we doing it all? So that's what we wanted to try to capture information on both. So as we begin to transition to the ranches, one more time, is we started with our ranch management, and it began with changing our mindset. We had to think different. And what we did is we had staff trainings. Now we're all here and we try to understand and learn a little bit more, but where we needed to start was get our mind right. You know, what's the old saying is that, the thickest, the most densest material is that material right between our two ears. And it was the same case with us. We had to stop and think differently. And so we went to the people that we thought understood it better, certainly had a longer track record than we did of how to understand what we needed to do. Back up one, if you could. Was understanding ag, holistic resource management, and then we also used ranching for profit. And there's a reason why we went with that direction. Go ahead. And we also what we wanted to do is make sure that we all understood that if we're going to manage going forward, our practices needed to focus around the soil health principles. If there's anything we're going to focus on, it's going to be around the soil health principles and how do we continue to advance and improve each of these areas with our ecosystem processes next. And these are what we wanted to focus on. So is our management going to improve these? And we wanted to address those areas that we know were weakest on each of the ranches and each of those pastures on the ranches. And then we're going to use, the main tool is going to be grazing management. So we got in there, we had to understand not only what we needed to manage, which first was stocking rate. And when we're going into a drought like we were at that point in time, we had to make sure that we were always stocked under carrying capacity. We also wanted to manage our grazing variables, just what Jason was talking about, to where we were managing our frequency, timing, intensity, and duration. And then we need to learn how to use stock density, because stock density is the tool. If we really wanted to build organic matter within the soil, you got to use it effectively, because we can unwind it just about as fast as we can put it down. It's just how do we want to make use of it. So go ahead. So we made us some management objectives. Let's go ahead and just pop them all the way through, if you will. These are the things we wanted to start with. Practices that align with the soil health principles, first and foremost. Manage for increased diversity at all times. And when you're used to looking at introduced pastures that are supposed to be looking like a park, it looks different. It looks a lot different. And no synthetic fertilizer and herbicides. Utilize diverse forage cover crops on our cropland acres. Minimize number of grazing herds. Try to get down to one where possible. Plan for less than 30 days of hay. We were planning for 3 to 4 months. Now we're going to go to less than 30, and we only really wanted to use it when we had inclement weather. We want to introduce small ruminants, part of that diversity. And when you saw some of those maps, we have a lot of brush. What's the best animal out there for the brush that we have as a livestock? Now, we had a lot to learn on how to use the goats, but we have added goats, and then we've also added sheep. And we wanted to limit use of dewormers to only our incoming livestock. We're not going to use it as a routine practice, because we wanted to make sure that we were doing all that we could to restore our soil and soil health. Go ahead. And then we needed to make a plan. So all the ranches have a grazing management plan. We wrote it out, something that we can go back and refer to, and then we plan not only for the year, then we come back and relook at it depends on kind of the conditions we're at, but almost monthly, we're looking at how do we need to adjust our grazing schedule. Next. And then when we do it, we want to monitor and adapt. We've got to track what we're doing so that we can refer back to it last year so that we're trying not to do the same thing time and again. And if we had certain things that were successful, we want to make note of it as we go. And another thing we did, if we're not going to be fertilizing, we're not going to be weed spraying, what we needed to do is get rid of a lot of equipment we weren't using. And we're the Noble Research Institute, therefore, at one time, all the ranches had their own set of equipment, just about. So we sat there and looked at it and says, if you're not really going to be using this, do we need it? And so we went through and we had a nice little sale, and we sold over $200,000 worth of just hay equipment. That we did retain one set, and we haven't used it in 3 years, but we still have it. And we sold over $200,000 worth of other farm equipment that, we just accumulated over the years. That as we looked at it with our plan going forward, we were not going to need. So we got all that. So we had that out of the way, so we couldn't just come back and say, okay, we want to defer back to our past. So then we started looking at what we needed to do on the ranches. And it was infrastructure, and our first infrastructure we wanted to do is make sure we had fences. If we're going to go in and put in sheep and goats, we had to do some infrastructure that would contain sheep and goats. And you can see, you got to have a lot of little wires, there on a fence, on our border fences, because our neighbors aren't always as happy to have our goats on them as we are. So we wanted to be sure we put dead wire on some of those more level lands, and then we use multiple barbed wires on these more rougher countries. We also put in a lot of livestock water, and we'll show you just a little bit to the extent that we do. With this livestock water, we use as much as we can, these little quick couplings, to where we can take the water to the livestock as frequently as we need to. Go ahead. This just shows an example what it looks like, and these are the next one will show you the different water systems. We've got them to where we put them on a little sled, move them around, or we've got them on wheels where they can go wherever the cattle needs to go. And we just hook them up. They've got a lot of recharge because we've got the capacity to do it, and we can run the herds as big as we want them to be at this point in time under these type systems because we got the recharge. Our herds right now, our biggest one that we've had under this has been close to about 300 head of yearlings, and then we've also had 250 head of cows drinking out of that one trough, plus, of course, their calves. Just to give you an idea what that would look like on the Red River Ranch, we came in here and we needed to put water where we needed to do more subdivisions, where we wanted to have our grazing. And so we took the water to the most productive acres first. That's where we wanted to put our investment. Next. At the Oswald Ranch, we also had to put water. It's 5,000 acres, and it was all stock ponds. And the only water that we had was down here where we have our shipping and receiving facility. And all these lines that are in here right now weren't there. And so when we got into the drought that first year in 2021, we had this whole side of the ranch that didn't have water. Now that's about 1,500 to 2,000 acres. We couldn't graze. And so we put a well in on that side. So now we've got a good water well here. We've got a good water well here. We've got water down this side. Down this side, we can put the cattle wherever we need them. We use a lane through here to where we can offset that. And right now we're working on trying to put the water to connect the two together so that we've got water all the way around the ranch, even if one of the wells goes down. So we put in some infrastructure so that we could ensure that we could graze the way we needed to. Go ahead. Here at Coffee, similar thing. Most of it was already pretty well set up. We just put in a couple extra lines where we had some of the better lands so we could do more high stock density grazing to complement some of our research projects also. Next. And then we had a lot of country that if you go back and you look into those maps, how many of y'all got into Google Earth and kind of do that little timeline, go back to about 1985, 86? Do that. They've got that little note. We did that on these properties, and some of these places that were open during that period of time were no longer open. These were savannas. You go back in the Webster survey, it says that these are supposed to be grasslands, and they had trees that were this big around. So we made a decision, it's cheaper to probably clear this up and try to put that into grass or let it come back to grass than it would be to try to buy more land. And so that's what we did. We went ahead and put it in, we mulched it, and then when you mulch it, you got to get ready for something, and we weren't, using chemicals, so you've got to have something to take care of it. So that's when we moved into our other multi-species. We started with sheep because we figured we needed to learn before we took the next steps. So we got our sheep, and then we went forward. Then we tried to integrate them with our cattle. We've learned that if we put the sheep and our guard dogs together, and then you move them into the cows, and the cows aren't used to having guard dogs around them, they don't like it too much. But if you started with the heifers and bring the sheep and the heifers and the guard dogs together, then the heifers become cows, and it's a lot more acceptable. Go ahead to the next one. And then we put in goats. We started with a few goats. We figured out we better learn how to use them. Put up those 3 little wires up there, and goats are goats. They're fun creatures to kind of watch, but Kurt Larson sitting up here, he's handling them. He says they're not near as much fun to have to mess with when they start messing with you. And so they'll sit there. He went out there, and Joe, who's our general ranch manager, said he'd sit there and watch these little goats when we first put them there for a little bit. Back up, well, you can leave it there for a second. But they'd look up there, they'd see that electric fence, and one of them would decide he wanted to go on the other side. He'd walk back and forth. He'd step back a few steps, close his eyes, and just run through it. We thought, man, we better make sure we have food and forage in front of them all the time. And that's what we try to do. If they decide they want to go somewhere, they're going to go. But we try to keep enough forage out in front of them. Go to the next one. We had a few goats, and then we got to a lot of goats. That's 1,200 nannies and their kids. We try to do that during the growing season. We work with a group of folks that have putting their goats on us for that period of time to help us try to manage the brush. And thank goodness that they're the ones that work with us on this, because this is pretty neat. They can do a lot of good in a relatively short period of time, but they are very selective eaters. And some of the things we thought they were going to eat, they didn't. And so we have to come back and do a little touch-up work behind them. But we do believe this is going to be part of the answer as we go forward. Next. And then we try to use multi-species cover crops wherever we can, especially on our cropland acres and then our introduced pasture, just to add some extra diversity. So as we're doing it, go ahead. We still have a no-till drill. We've got a small one. We've got a large one, depending on the acreage that we're trying to work within. And then on these bigger fields, it works pretty nice when you've got these multi-species coming in. And we get a lot of use out of them. We were able to grow some of these pastures up to where they get 8, 10, 12 feet tall. And then we go in there and we strip graze them. Try to put as much carbon on the ground as we do in through the animals at the same time. And we get the soil health benefits. That's what we're really trying to do on these areas that have been farmed out. And that's what it looked like. We had applied fertilizer, pulled everything off, made a lot of hay, never put anything back. So these last few years, we've been doing all that we can to put more organic matter back into the soil. Go ahead. And even in our introduced pastures, we've tried with a lot of success with our cool season annuals on our Bermuda grass pastures. A little bit of success on some of our Bermuda grass pastures with some of the warm seasons, but it all is very dependent on the season. If we don't have much spring rain, early summer rain, we don't get it. And so we've learned to strategically apply the seed mixtures depending on the weather conditions at any given time. Go ahead. This is a pretty neat little slide right here. We've also learned that if you graze a certain way to where we're not grazing out our cool season annuals completely, Dave, 28 years ago, when we said graze out, we meant graze everything that we planted. Well, on this place right here, what we're doing is now on a lot of these sites is we go ahead and get grazing during the spring, but then we want it to go to seed. And then we let it grow seed and let all the Bermuda grass grow up in it. This right here is not Bermuda grass underneath it, but it's a crop field, and we're doing the same thing. But back up one. Somewhere, one side of this was drilled, the other side is volunteer. Which side? This is south, this is north. Go to the next slide. This was earlier in the spring. I'm on the other end of the pasture right now. This is the south side, this is the north side. Now you can kind of tell which one got drilled. The south side got drilled. This is all volunteer, but I'll take it all day long. And that's what the guys are looking for. What are the opportunities by just changing our management? Don't graze out. Graze it while you can, and then let it go to seed and don't worry about it. Because we have enough seed now, we won't have to plant rye in that place again for who knows how long. Go ahead. The other thing that we're doing is that, some of these old weeds, these giant forbs that we have out there like sunflower and the giant ragweed and mare's tail that, Joe is 6 feet tall. He's reaching up about 8 feet tall. You can see how tall this is. That picture was taken right over there. Now, what is that big plant doing? We've always been told what grows above ground grows below ground. That's a lot of below ground stuff. And the cattle will eat it. Pretty neat. Go ahead, next picture. We'll talk more about that in a second. Go ahead. So we do the adaptive grazing. And by doing the adaptive grazing, they'll eat things normally they wouldn't eat, and they learn to eat more diverse plants than they would if they were allowed to be selected. So this is what we did. We shifted the calving and breeding season. We were spring calving starting January 1st. Now, I don't know who defined spring as January 1, but our heifers calved soon after January 1, our cows in February 1st, which is, that's still winter. Still winter. So we shifted it down to where we don't start calving until about the 1st of April. Next. And then we give grazing allocations. We decided we wanted to try to at least move those cattle at least once every 3 days. Grass starts to regrow within about 3 days if you've got moisture. We wanted to move them before it started regrowing. Most of the time we're moving them daily through the week. We'll give them 3 days over a weekend. And then this time of year, now that we've got the calves up, we're finished calving, we're going to be moving them multiple times a day. Go ahead. Over winter, less than 30 days of hay. Everybody says you can't do it. We've done it for 3 years. Now, we haven't had much of a winter, but we have that 30-day supply back there just in case. And we will strategically use it for soil health purposes. But the only time that we really had to feed hay is when we had weaning and we're holding calves up for just a little bit, and when we had a couple of days during the wintertime where we decided we'd give them just a little bit during the inclement weather where we had snow or ice. But that's only been 2 or 3 days. And then what we try to do is on this high stock density grazing, we like to see all our cool season annuals grow up in the spring, let them take it down on a daily basis. Go ahead. That's that same pasture later in the summer. Now we've got Johnson grass and Bermuda grass. That's probably looks as like it's been fertilized, and all it had was the manure and the trampling effect of the animals. Go ahead. And we also try to keep all the animals in herds. The bigger the herd, the better. We can get more herd impact the larger the herd that we have. This is at our Oswald Ranch, about 250 cows and their calves. We try to run our heifers with the cows as much as possible, up to the point they start calving. Go ahead. Go ahead and hit this little button. This is just an example of 350 head of stockers that we had. You push it one more time, it'll start rolling. And this is how hard it is once the cattle learn. I kind of joke, the cattle learn quicker than most of us people do. It's just that they've got to be indoctrinated in what it takes to get them moving. The neat thing about something like this is the animals in the back, we always pay a little more attention to, because they may be the ones that need that extra attention. Go ahead. All right. So as we do this grazing rotation, we try to leverage the resources that we have. We also try to take these cattle that during the summertime when we've got these pecan trees, we try to move them through those shaded areas. And then, go ahead. And then when we get ready to wean those calves off, we just separate the cows, and the calves will go back into those areas that have been grazed that's been able to allow to regrow. They're familiar with the area, they adapt, and they go right back where they were, even though their mom's not right there any longer. It takes a lot of the stress off the weaning process. And this is right there in that same area where that picture was taken earlier. What we see is those livestock, they learn to walk down those weeds, and they'll eat everything off of it. And have you ever tested the crude protein on any of these forbs during this point of time of year? It's way higher than any of the grasses that we've got out there. Most of the time, it's going to be 25 to 30% crude protein. TDN is going to be as good as most of the grasses. It makes a really good supplement in the livestock. The cattle return to like it. And then the ultra-high stock density grazing. Go ahead. One of the things we've learned is that to have most effective use of our high stock density grazing is right there as we're trying to make that transitions and introduce pasture. We'll go ahead and we'll graze down. Then we come right in here and drill right behind the cattle, and you say, well, that sure takes a lot of time getting on and off. Kurt's sitting up here, and it doesn't take him any longer than it did before. It's just very timely. It's just how you want to manage your time to make it work, and it becomes very effective. Go ahead. We're doing the same thing on those brush areas. Cattle don't like brush, but if you lock them in there overnight, they can have a pretty good effect on it. Go ahead. And this is what you see. They'll come in there and make good use of it, and there's still plenty for the goats to follow up behind it. Here's a lot of mare's tail. Look underneath it on this side. They've cleaned it up, and typically what we see is then we have the Bermuda grass or the other grasses coming up afterwards. So it works very effective just by keeping these cattle moving. And then we've used a little bit of hay. This is a little bit of a drone footage. We have several areas where we had done a lot of small grain trials and trying to do some of our plant breeding work. But when you do that, you've got to basically use a lot of chemical to get rid of a lot of the forbs that you don't want. As a result, we've got a lot of residuals still left in the soil, and we lack the diversity coming in there. So we're trying to feed a lot more hay on those sites intentionally. Cows didn't need the hay, but we wanted to try to get that out incorporated just to build the organic matter. Go ahead. And then running our heifers with the cows up to the point the cows get ready to start calving. That way the calves learn, those heifers learn to eat with the cows, and we find out these make much better mamas than their mothers do because they've never been exposed to being fed very much at all. Go ahead. And then it's about observations. And we get out there and we're out there. We're constantly looking at the soils, smelling them, looking at the structure, seeing the improvement, looking for biological activity. Go ahead. Looking for things like this. We've got a study with OSU right now where they're going out there and they're monitoring our dung beetles. And we're seeing compared to the neighbors, we have a lot more population I guess there's 4 different types of dung beetles they're looking for, and we've got populations of all 4. Go ahead. And we're also studying and looking at the bricks. We're seeing as we've moved away from the fertilizer, a lot of these forages are just a higher nutrient density, which is what the bricks would tend to indicate. And then we've also learned in some of these areas, if we leave those weeds out there, guess what the grasshoppers want when you've got all that Bermuda grass underneath it? They don't want the Bermuda grass, they eat the weeds. So we still, as we went through the summer last year, when everyone else was needing to spray for the grasshoppers, our grasshoppers were eating our forbs. We still had the grass for the cattle. We had virtually no impact. And of course, we're doing all our testing with the soils at the same time. Go ahead. Go ahead, one more. So production and financial overview. This is what y'all really came here to hear on this presentation. Just to give you a little more context on it, this is what our numbers were between the transition and after transition. You can see what our cow numbers look like. We were all cattle prior to the transition. We begin to add the multi-species, and you kind of see where we are. And then we account for right here the different nannies, and right now we've got the nannies and their kids back out there one more time. Go ahead. If we look at the changes in our direct cost that we're calling here are those that are the feed, seed, fertilizer, veterinary, and chemicals. What does it look like from year to year? 2020, you can see where we are as you go across the years, and you can see the feed kind of stayed pretty much by the numbers of head, which gives us a pretty good indication that our hay that we were producing was of quality enough. We didn't need a whole lot of feed. Our feed was directly proportional to the amount of stocker cattle that we were maintaining. And then you've got the seed. We had a big increase in our inputs on our seed, but that's all our cover crops. Then you can see it drop down because we didn't feel like we needed quite that diversity when we were in the middle of the drought. Fertilizer was where it really dropped off. Veterinary, we dropped off. No longer doing annual routine dewormings, and then we haven't been buying near as many stocker cattle. And then our chemicals dropped out. Go ahead. Go ahead, one more. We'll just get down to this point. This is the dollars saved between the year 2020 and 2023. Now remember, 2023 is the third year of the drought. So that you take that in consideration. And go ahead. If we took all these together, one more time, we're averaging, of course, the extreme is $270,000 savings from 2020 to 2023, but we're averaging about $168,000 in direct cost. Go ahead. And as we begin to look at the gross revenues, you can see that our gross revenues changed quite a bit too. We no longer had calves that we were carrying over from season to season, and as they came out, we weren't replacing them with other stocker cattle. So our revenues were down. Our total operating cost, that's our direct cost, and then all our other operating costs, except salaries. Well, we didn't put the salary information in there. And you can see this is what our costs look like, and then one more, our net revenues. So back before the transition, we were losing a little bit of money. These last 3 years, we've made money. Now, part of that is carryover from some of the calf crop that we had last year, but we had carryover from this year. So you begin to look at it, it's still a net positive margin. Go ahead. Then we wanted to look at these capital expenditures. You've got to come up here. We do have these capital projects that we're putting in. We're trying to put as much of it in up front just so that we can begin to look at the return on investment over time. And we haven't started that analysis, but we wanted to look at what it cost us per acre. That's based off of that 13,000 acres that we've got grazable. And if we just divided that out to where per acre cost, and we just looked at it over a 40-year horizon and saying it's a straight line amortization, it's only 54 cents of an acre in 2020, and then you can see what it looks like the rest of the years. It's not that much per acre, but you still have to pay for it up front. So cash flow is really important. How do you want to pay for it? And if you look at our experiences alone, just by being able to sell some of the equipment that we had, changing our management such that we are no longer had as many direct costs, we could have phased this in over a longer period of time and still been in good shape. And same thing on over total revenue. If we just take this figure here, add it to this figure, this is what it would look like as far as a return back to our own operations. Go ahead. We also do a little bit of what we call ranching for profit accounting too. The cattle statistics, go ahead and pop it on down here. What we want to do is begin to look at our stock flow because the direct costs aren't the entire picture. If we have inventory that go from carry over from year to year, or we've got animals that transferred from one class to another, we need to go ahead and make sure we're tracking it, and we're able to do that and then add that back into our economics. Go ahead. So we have our trading account. We go ahead and put values, and so that we make sure that we're fair to all ranches, we use a value for the year. Go ahead. And then we just look at the direct cow cost, our inventory adjustments. Our direct cow cost for last year was $198 per cow. Compared to what we were doing before, it's a huge, huge difference. Gross margin, this is what it would look like. And using the benchmarks from the Ranching for Profit Executive Link courses, where they're sitting there saying that they'd like to see that be greater than 70%, our gross margin ratio of about 83% for that operation is where we want to be. So we feel like we're on the right direction as far as our economics within our livestock management. Go ahead. And we're trying to do this for all the ranches, trying to look at each of them, go ahead, to see what that would look like. The thing is, we still have a lot of overheads. That's one of those areas that we're going to continue to work on. But the overheads where you'd like for it to be about a 40% margin, it's quite a bit over. But we're also the Noble Research Institute. We still have a lot of depreciation that we're going to be working on. But that's what we're trying to work on next. Cost per head, margins. You can see the operations are working well. What we notice is we got some of these operations that don't carry cow herds, but we're using them for grazing. So So we need to put a value on our grazing. And just use an example of Oswald, one of our ranches, where we have about 70 paddocks that we're actually managing. We're also looking at the grazable acres, average animal days per acre, about 46. If we calculate that out, click it one more time. And we've set our grazing value at $80 per acre. What it would come up to is about almost $88,000 worth of grazing value, and we can do that for each ranch just so that we can compare across enterprises the contributions back to the ranches themselves. Go ahead. So take-home messages, just a couple of them. First, this is just Noble's experiences. Everyone has their own context. You're going to have your own information, but this is just a quick look at what it looks like when you really set your goal about managing regeneratively. You want to begin with a clear set of objectives and a plan. Probably don't want to just be shooting from the hip. And when you begin, do what you can do well. You may not be able to do everything at one time, but if you can take a portion of it and begin, that's the best place to start. Start with where you can work and do well. And then monitor and adapt. Make sure that you're making progress toward the goals. As we begin watching the information that's beginning to come in, we begin to see the improvements that we're making. Always measure against yourself. You can't make comparisons even across our own ranches. We've got to make it only to the individual ranches. And regenerative management can improve the profitability, but you have to manage for it. You know, that's one of the things that we really want to look forward as we go to the future is if you want to plan for a profit, we've got to make sure that we start that from the beginning. A little bit more about Noble, you can holler at us. We've got a little booth over here. Be happy to visit more. And next, we've got several little courses that are out there. We're going to continue to add these over the next few years. If you go online, find a course, you'll be able to get that you'll be able to find information. Leave you with this. You know, the individual farmer and landowner must of necessity be the most powerful agent in conserving and improving the soil. Again, you know, our founder, he was probably way ahead of his time, but his words still echo into what we're trying to achieve at Noble. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Hugh. So we've got a few minutes here then before we are going to dismiss and head over for our evening activities, but I thought we'd give you all an opportunity to ask questions. So just to get us started, Dr. Roundtree, I'd be curious, you know, I know things are different in Michigan. You have gone to no nitrogen fertilizer in your system. That forage in those pictures look beautiful, lush. How is the soil nitrogen cycle? How are you able to accomplish that? I mean, is it simply the manure return to the soil, or do you have some legumes in that system?
Great question. Yeah, thanks. We for 20 plus years, as the farm was intensively hayed, probably about 50 to 80 units of N per acre. And basically what'll happen is the plants that can, you know, survive in that system are the ones that survive. Often are tall, cool season grasses. And so what we first saw is that, look, man, this thing's been, our 100-year anniversary is pretty coming up. And even though that was a forested area, there's a lot of legumes in the latent seed bank that have been there over years. And so when we press the right buttons, which number one is that we use greater density to allow for more open canopy. Number two, we took N out of the system. And number three, we allowed for longer recovery periods. The first thing we saw was a tremendous boost in red and white clover, specifically bird's foot trefoil. Really fantastic. And so those things began to evolve. Now, we will have pastures that aren't as healthy, and generally 3 to 5 pounds of a legume seed, typically red red clover base, no-till like Hugh showed. For us, we do it in March when the ground's still frozen normally. And we'll come in those systems and put about 3 to 5 pounds of a clover in. We've done significant trials on looking at mixed pasture in a cool season environment just compared to alfalfa grass. Alfalfa grass is considerably more productive, we typically think. But over a longer period of time, what we typically found is that the productivity balanced out, and we actually saw as much or more nitrogen cycling and function with a diverse mixed pasture than we did an alfalfa grass. And that just speaks again to the biodiversity. And what we typically find is that when you have a lot of different plants out there, there's greater opportunities for plants to thrive, to germinate, to be successful. When you, man, I used to watch them old boys in Louisiana sprig jigs or different Tiftons, and they'll look good for 3 years, and then after that 3 years, it's just common and bahia that want to come immediately back, right? And so the fact is that when you provide more plants, there's greater opportunities for the plants you want to thrive.
Okay. Very good. Questions for either one of our speakers? Hugh, I would be curious if you think you're seeing some parasite resistance development in your heifers, right? You're still retaining heifers, correct? But not deworming them. What are you seeing? I think that one's turned on, Hugh. I don't know if it works well or not.
At this point, we at weaning, we try not to worm anything unless we've got something that we're bringing in from outside. You know, the animals that have been raised out there in the, you know, under this type of grazing management, we're just letting them just see where they can go. If something isn't going to be thrifty, they just get cold. You know, it's one of the simple ways to handle a lot of the problems is just go ahead and remove the animals that aren't going to be functional within the system. And so far, the ones that we've been able to retain back, and you know, we haven't always retained everything, but we'll go through, or the managers will go through, and they'll select out the females that sure have the potential to make a cow. And then after that, very few of them will fall out, and we just carry them on with the, you know, once they enter into the cow herd. You know, if we get an animal that looks like that needs to be dewormed, we'll get her up and we'll deworm her, but then she stays up and she'll end up with a new home.
Sure.
Just to follow up, we quit using anthelmintics in 2011, and we followed through with fecal egg counts, just here and there to spot and sample. And what we typically saw is that our heifers had a high parasite burden. The cows had virtually zero. And so, to Hugh's point, that if we can get the heifers through that initial burden and shock and exposure, if they're adapted to the environment and if they're the right kind, we saw no problems. And if they didn't breed back, that might have been an inherent, you know, characteristic of them not being as parasite tolerant. The other thing that we typically do is we graze taller. And so by grazing taller, number one, you know, the worm eggs don't come up as high up the roots of the plants. And number two, we rotate with longer recovery periods, so we don't see the parasites recycling themselves, especially important, as you guys know, with sheep and goats. And so for those things, the management, and then just the, you know, kind of indirectly identifying those probably genetically resistant or the ways that we've moved forward. And then the premise why, you're probably asking why, and there's been work to suggest that using dewormers at greater content can negatively impact nematodes in the soil and other, like dung beetles and other things. And so that's kind of the main drive on the why.
Gotcha. Makes sense. All right. Dr. Johnson, do you want to make your way up here, and we'll give some instructions for this evening, but unless there's another, got a question. Okay, thank you.
Can you hear me? Okay. Excellent presentation, Dr. Roundtree. I was curious, different countries use different types of greenhouse quantification. So for example, green feeder in Europe, they use a lot of modeling. In plant science, equivariant. So do you have any thoughts which method provides more accurate measurement? Thank you.
bring up a great point. And so there are like different methodologies everywhere. Most of them go back to UN data, pretty much UN equations. But what I'd like to say is that is one of the biggest challenges, your question, in the supply chains today, because they're not just a North American company, they're a global company. And so here you are trying to create a global supply chain and a global system, and you've got different countries requiring different metrics for accounting for greenhouse gases. And so McDonald's, for instance, they've got a different set of rules in Australia versus Europe versus South America versus North America. And there is no agreement on what is standard in those systems. And that's a huge issue. I will say, out of any place I've been and worked in, I think Australia, not trying to prop you up or anything, but I think Australia is a decade ahead of us in this work. I think that they have been considerably more proactive working with their ranchers on the carbon game. So for example, what happens in Australia is you basically calculate through the regulatory agency Australia a net emission baseline for every ranch. And it has to do with the amount of cattle, what type of area you're in, the amount of rain. And so you effectively use that and create an emission baseline. And then that emission baseline serves as a neutral. And then ranchers are rewarded based on how much carbon they may bring into that system through either measured soil carbon, measured and modeled carbon, or modeled only. And that's a tiered payment, the former being the greatest, right? And to me, that is the fairest and easiest and most straightforward way that I've seen in all the work I've done globally in terms of what Australia's done with their ACUs, they call them, their accredited carbon units.
All right, seeing none, I'm going to ask one more. I'd be curious, I don't know, maybe some of you in that Mark McCauley, Bill Bowman, others in the audience may invite you to jump in on this one, but my question to you two, is there a genetic by environment interaction with these grazing systems? So we know that if you increase stocking density in I don't know what you want to call it, an intensive grazing management system, that livestock production in general, individual performance goes down. So does that suggest that the type of cattle that you suggest, you mentioned, Dr. Roundtree, moderate to below breed average, growth genetics, for example, might be a better fit in those systems than cattle with higher genetic output capacity?
Yeah, that's some really hard stuff, Dave. But first thing, I always question the data, not question the data, but I think we always have to put a framework on those data points and look at how systems-based the research was done versus replicated paddocks in a small, meaning did they have 100 cows in a system, 150, 500, or 5? So if I could just contrast, the biggest difference I saw when I had my semi-Angus cows that were big girls. No offense to them, I love them still, but they were big girls. And then I kept a residual of those cows to kind of as a test. And then I brought in that red Angus herd. And there was a family of groundhogs that lived in the ditch. And we have to go across the street to weigh cows and put them back in paddocks, right? And so we were doing a trial, and it just so happened we run all them semi-Angus cows out first. And the semis just kind of loafed along like a quasi-dairy cow and looked at the woodchucks and waved that were kind of hanging out in the ditch and just kind of went on their way. Well, the cows I brought in from Montana had been up in the mountains every summer. And those cows, those red cows, the minute I got them out there, and those poor damn woodchucks didn't know what hit them. Those cows, they immediately attacked those woodchucks like anything I've ever seen. They were stabbing them. The poor little son of bitches were flying in the air. I mean, it was unbelievable, the differences in behavior. And what we typically saw early on is that cow herd coming from a forage-based environment with a lot more pressure, they had an ability to keep their head down and graze. And they had this behavioral component that a lot of the cattle that I inherited that had been supplemented and kind of like spoon-fed, so to speak, right? And so when you start looking at these epigenetic effects over time in these systems, I think there's some things going on that we really aren't sure of why. And I'm not the best person in the room to answer that, but I do know that grazing behavior is learned, and there's probably, again, some epigenetic effects that go on with it that have a huge impact on the phenotypes and the performance in those systems. I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I've never seen any cattle going out there tossing any woodchucks or anything out there in our spot. But you know, as you look at observe these heifers compared to the cows, you know that observation is if they've learned to eat with the cattle and they've never been taught to come to a feed, to a feeder. When we open those gates, those heifers get in there and they jump out there ahead of the cows and they go to the best places that they can get. And so they're creaming it before the cows ever get a chance. And they never come back and look at it. As we begin to look at the next pasture, they're the first ones to come to the gate. You know, they begin to have a whole different mentality to where they're never on welfare. You know, they just don't know what welfare is. And as a result, they've maintained their body condition a whole lot better. They've continued to perform, and as we're watching these young females, they're beginning to take on a phenotype that seems to be better fit for our environment and our cow size, because we weigh all our cattle every time they go across the chute. You know, it's dropped from about 1,500 pounds to less than 1,200. So we're seeing the phenotype begin to reduce, but that doesn't mean that some of those cows aren't 1,500 pounds, but they continue to stay content, they stay fleshed up, and you just don't notice that they're that big until you get behind them and just see how wide they are.
Sure.
I'm probably motor mouthing now, but I go back to a project, Fred Provenza. Anybody heard of Dr. Fred Provenza? It's one of the best animal behaviorists in the world, and just one of the smartest, best dudes you'll ever meet. And I don't remember, this could have been 20 years ago, Dave. But what he did is he took a cow herd and he split them in half. He supplemented with a normal byproduct or something, one group. The others were wintered on like really low quality prairie hay. And so he calved both the calves out of those cow herds that were managed differently, right? One on a more of a supplement-based approach, one on really low quality hay. So he calved them out and he took the calves and he followed the calves through, and he took half the calves from the grain treatment and put them on grass, and he took half those, fed the low quality hay, and he put them on grain. And what he basically showed in the work is that the calves born from the cows that were fed supplements, they did really poorly on that lower quality forage treatment. But the calves that were born from the low quality forage treatment, when they went on the grain, they kept trucking. And I always remembered that because I think there's I think there's behavior, but I think there might be some fetal programming and some other things that might be going on. But he did that work forever, long ago. But it always struck me as a really important point in some of that.
Yeah. He's the one that showed us how to teach cows how to eat weeds like a goat. Very good. More questions? Well, seeing none, Dr. Johnson, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
With that, we are about ready to adjourn to the Wes Watkins Center. I think by the time you all drive there or freshen up and drive there, they'll be ready with the social hour. We've got dinner on your schedule and a great keynote speaker for you tonight. It's been a good first afternoon, and we will see you at Wes Watkins in a bit. Is everybody comfortable with how to get to the Wes Watkins Center? You're going to pull out here to the north, get on McElroy. You're going to head east, and when you get to the stop sign here down the hill, it is 1 more mile. It's going to put you at another stop sign, You're going to see the O'Brate Baseball Stadium to the left. If you turn right, the Wes Watkins Center is about a block to your right or south there. Bob, you can follow me if you need to. I see you. So, thanks for being with us this afternoon. We'll see you tonight.